I was already 70 when I finally opened my eyes. Or maybe I should say, when I let myself see. Because deep down, we always know, don't we? We just don't want to admit it. Because admitting means accepting. And accepting means acting. And that's the hardest part for someone like me. Raised to be quiet. Raised to serve. My name is Margaret Dawson. I was born in 1952, in a small town tucked between the hills of Pennsylvania. We didn't have much, but we had values. Those old, tight values that wrapped around you like a corset you were taught to endure, to bite your tongue, to look pretty and be agreeable, to marry well and make it last, no matter what. I met Thomas Dawson in the spring of 1970 at the church picnic. He wasn't from our town. He was from Pittsburgh, visiting cousins. Tall, confident, sun-tanned and funny. I was barely 18, still wearing hand-sewn dresses and hair ribbons. He brought a whole new world with him. Ambition, promise, polish. He made me feel seen. By summer, we were engaged. My mother said I was lucky. "He'll take care of you," she said, eyes shining with approval. "He's got a future. Don't ruin it with questions." I didn't. I let him lead. I followed. We married the following year. I left my dreams at the altar. I had wanted to be a nurse, maybe even move to Philadelphia. But I traded it all for a home, for his name, for the Dawson legacy. I told myself I was happy. And for a time, maybe I was. We had 2 sons, Michael and Andrew. I raised them while Thomas expanded his father's construction business. Our house grew, just like our family. We moved from a 2-bedroom cottage to a 3-story colonial with a garden in the back. I planted roses there, my mother's favorites. Life looked good from the outside. But inside, the cracks began early. Thomas was distant, always busy, always traveling. At first, I thought it was just ambition. Then came the unexplained absences, the late nights, the perfume that wasn't mine, the lipstick stains I never wore. I found hotel receipts tucked into coat pockets, and God help me, I washed them every time, washed the truth away. He never hit me. He never yelled. But silence can be a scream, and absence can bruise you deeper than fists. I told myself I was imagining things. I prayed harder. I went to church more often. I baked more pies. I waited for the man I married to come home, not just to the house, but to me. But Thomas never truly came back. I stopped asking questions. I focused on the boys, on the PTA, on the birthdays and Christmases and the rituals that kept me from falling apart. Every time he smiled in public and kissed my cheek for the camera, I smiled back, for the family, for appearances, for the lie I couldn't stop living. Until that Sunday morning. It was April. The daffodils had just bloomed. I remember because I had just arranged them in a vase by the window when the phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost didn't pick up, but I did. "Mrs. Dawson?" the woman asked. Her voice was nervous, trembling. "Yes?" I don't know how to say this. You don't know me, but I think you should." There was a pause. Then she said his name, Thomas, and a word that changed everything. Daughter. I couldn't breathe. Not because he had cheated. I knew that part. But because he had fathered a child, a grown woman now. And she wanted to meet me, not for money, not for vengeance, but because she had questions. Questions only I could answer. She had found me because of an old letter, one Thomas had written, never mailed, that she had discovered after her mother passed away. Her name was Natalie, and she looked just like my youngest, Andrew. I sat down on the kitchen floor, daffodils wilting behind me. The lie was no longer just mine to carry. It had grown roots and bloomed into a truth I couldn't deny. For 3 days, I didn't speak to Thomas. I didn't scream. I didn't throw plates. I just stopped existing in his space. And for the first time, he noticed. "Margaret?" he asked one night, touching my hand at dinner. "Is something wrong?" And I laughed. I laughed. The kind of laugh that doesn't sound like laughter. "You're asking me that now?" He didn't deny it. He didn't even flinch, just lowered his eyes and said, "It was a mistake. A mistake that turned into a person. A mistake with a name, a face. And suddenly, I wasn't sad. I was done." That night, after he fell asleep, I went into the attic. I hadn't been up there in years. It still smelled of mothballs and cedar. I pulled out an old trunk, my college trunk, the one I had before I became Mrs. Dawson. Inside were letters, photographs, and a name that still made my fingers tremble. Daniel Harper. He was Thomas's best friend, but he had been my secret, not in a romantic way. At least, not officially. But there had been something, a warmth, a gaze, a silence between us that had more meaning than words. He had disappeared after the wedding, moved out west, started a life of his own. I hadn't seen him in over 40 years. But I remembered, and for the first time since that phone call, I felt something that wasn't rage. I felt a spark, a question. What if he still remembered me? It took me 3 weeks to gather the courage. 3 weeks of quiet breakfasts, of Thomas pretending everything was fine. 3 weeks of phone calls with Natalie, who turned out to be kind, soft-spoken, and confused, just like I had been once. She had grown up without knowing her father, but always felt there was something missing. It broke me to know that she had lived her life asking the same questions I once silenced in myself. I met her in a cafe. Neutral ground. She wore a pale, blue sweater and held her hands like they didn't know what to do. She was 38, married, had a daughter named Lily. She didn't want to cause pain. She just wanted to know. We spoke for 2 hours. I didn't cry. She did. At the end, she hugged me like someone who had been denied too many embraces. When I got home that day, Thomas was waiting on the porch. He had flowers, tulips, my least favorite. I didn't say a word, just walked past him, into the house and into the past, because that same night I looked up Daniel Harper. It wasn't hard. The internet, even to an old woman like me, was generous with its secrets. I found an address in Oregon, a bookstore. The photo was small, but unmistakable. Same kind eyes, a little more silver in the beard. I didn't write him right away. I didn't know what I would even say. I wasn't sure I had the right. But I sent a letter. Not an email. A letter, handwritten, sealed with wax like the old days. I told him who I was. I told him what had happened. And I asked just one thing. If you remember me, and if there's a part of you that still wonders, write me back. 3 weeks later, I received a package. Inside was a book, an old edition of Jane Eyre, and a note tucked inside its cover. Margaret. I never stopped wondering. Call me. I held that note to my chest like a relic. The first time we spoke on the phone, it was like no time had passed. He didn't ask about Thomas. He didn't pry. He just listened. And that was all I needed. We spoke again the next day, and the day after. By the end of the month, I had told him everything. Daniel never judged me. He didn't rush me. He just made space for me, like he always had. And then he said something I'll never forget. I Once told myself I'd never come between you and Thomas, but I think he walked away long before I ever could. That's when I knew. I booked a flight. I told no one, not even my sons. I packed one suitcase, wrote a note for Thomas, and left it on the kitchen table next to the untouched tulips. I stayed faithful to a ghost. I'm going to find someone who sees me alive. Landing in Oregon felt like stepping into another life. The air was cooler. The silence felt softer. Daniel met me at the airport with a single daisy in his hand. My favorite. How he remembered, I don't know. But when he smiled, I felt something in me fall into place. We spent 4 days together, just talking, drinking coffee, walking by the river, holding hands like teenagers who had no one to disappoint. He never kissed me. Not yet. He respected my story too much to write himself into it too soon. But I wanted him to. I wasn't 20 anymore. I wasn't even 40. But for the first time, I wasn't invisible. I was a woman again. Not a mother, not a wife, a woman. When I returned to Pennsylvania, I was changed. And Thomas saw it instantly. He tried everything. Dinners, gifts, even tears. He apologized more in those 2 weeks than he had in 5 decades. He said he regretted everything. He promised he would win me back. But he never really knew me, so he didn't understand what he had lost. I didn't scream. I didn't throw his betrayal in his face. I just looked him in the eyes and said, "You had a lifetime to see me. Now I need someone who still wants to." That's when he knew. The next weeks were tense. He became jealous, possessive. He asked who I was seeing. I never answered directly. I just smiled. And for the first time in years, I felt in control. But nothing prepared me for what happened next. Because one night, Daniel showed up in my town. Unannounced. Standing on my porch like a chapter I never thought I'd reopen. And Thomas saw him. It was dusk when he arrived. The kind of golden evening that makes everything look gentler than it is. I was trimming the rose bushes when I saw the car slow down in front of the house. My heart stuttered. I recognized it. Not because of the license plate or the make, but because I knew he would come. Daniel stepped out with a careful grace, holding a small suitcase in one hand and a bouquet of wildflowers in the other. I froze. He didn't wave. He just waited, by the gate, like a man unsure if he was still welcome. I took 2 steps forward before I heard the screen door slam behind me. Thomas. He was already walking down the porch steps, his jaw tight, his fists clenched. My first thought was not now. Not like this. I opened my mouth to say something, but I didn't have to. Daniel spoke first. "I'm not here to fight. I'm here to see her." Thomas looked at me. Just looked. Like he was seeing me for the first time. Not the wife who folded his shirts and stayed quiet, but the woman who now had a choice. "Is this what you want?" he asked, voice low and trembling. "Is this who you ran to?" I didn't answer, because the truth is, I hadn't run to Daniel. I had walked away from a life that had been erasing me for decades. Thomas turned back to Daniel. "You're my friend. You were my best man. And now, what? You show up on my porch, like a stray dog looking for scraps?" Daniel didn't flinch. "I was your friend, until I saw how you treated her." They stared at each other for a long moment. No shouting, just tension thick enough to silence the crickets. I stepped between them. "Enough!" 2 syllables. That's all it took to make them pause. "Thomas, you had your chance. You didn't lose me to Daniel. You lost me to yourself." He didn't reply. He just turned and walked back inside. Daniel stayed outside with me that night. We sat on the porch swing like we used to in college. Knees almost touching, hands brushing. He didn't try to hold me. He just listened. Again. We talked until the stars faded. About our lives. About regrets. About how long we'd spent pretending we were fine. When the sun rose, he kissed my forehead and said he'd wait for me to be ready. Then he drove off, back to Oregon, back to his world. But something had shifted, and that shift didn't sit well with Thomas. In the days that followed, he tried everything to reassert control. He accused me of humiliating him, of making him a joke in town, of destroying the family name. And when none of that worked, he did what men like him always do when they lose control. He threatened. "Don't you dare bring him here again," he said one night, voice sharp. "If he shows his face, I'll ruin him." I looked at him. Really looked, and realized I no longer feared him. Not his words, not his absence, not his power, because he had already taken everything from me once. There was nothing left to lose, except myself, and I wasn't giving that up again. So I left, not in anger, not in panic, but in peace. I packed a single suitcase, the same one I used when I first left for college. I didn't take the china, the family albums, or the rings. I took my journals, my mother's rosary, and the Daisy Daniel had left me. I wrote my sons a letter. I told them the truth, not to take sides, but to understand. They were grown men now, with wives and children. I knew this would shake them, but I hoped they'd see me not as the woman who raised them, but as the woman who had survived. I moved into a small cottage by the lake, rented it from an old friend. It was quiet, peaceful. I filled the walls with books, the kitchen with smells I had forgotten I loved. Cinnamon, rosemary, fresh bread. I started painting again. I walked barefoot on the grass. I cried. I laughed. I healed. And Daniel? He called every evening, just to hear my voice. Sometimes we said nothing for minutes, just sat in silence, letting the connection fill the space. That time it emptied. Then one evening, he asked, "Would it be all right if I came for good?" When Daniel asked if he could come for good, I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't want him to, but because I had spent so long asking for permission to breathe that I had forgotten how to inhale deeply on my own. That night, I walked to the edge of the lake behind the cottage. The water was still. The moon reflected on its surface like a silver coin waiting to be flipped. I thought of all the years I had spent beside a man who never truly saw me, of the time I had lost, of the pieces I had stitched together to keep a life from falling apart. And I thought of Daniel, how he had waited without asking, listened without judgment, loved without demand. I called him the next morning. "You can come," I said, "not to save me, just to be with me." And he did. He arrived 3 days later, with nothing more than a duffel bag, a smile, and a bottle of wine older than our last kiss. We weren't young anymore. There were creases where laughter used to be, and silences that didn't need to be filled. But there was also something I hadn't felt in decades. Safety. We didn't rush into anything. We lived like neighbors at first. 2 rooms, 2 toothbrushes, 1 shared cup of morning coffee. He helped me plant tomatoes in the backyard. I read to him on the porch. We spoke of everything and nothing, and slowly, the spaces between our words became less fragile. One afternoon, I found a photo of myself in his wallet. It was taken at our wedding, me in white, smiling nervously, Daniel in the background, eyes on me instead of the bride and groom. My breath caught. You kept this all these years? I asked. I never stopped seeing you, he replied. It was the first time I let him kiss me since we were 60 years younger. But not everyone was happy. Word got around. Small towns have long memories and louder mouths. My sons called, confused and concerned. Mom, what are you doing? Michael asked. Are you sure this is appropriate? Appropriate? I laughed, bitter and tired. You think it was appropriate for your father to keep a child's secret from me for 30 years? He was silent. Andrew was gentler. We just don't want you to get hurt. I was hurt for 50 years, sweetheart. Now I'm trying to feel alive. They didn't understand. Not fully. But they respected me. Eventually. Thomas, however, did not. He came to the cottage one evening, unannounced. He stood on the porch like a ghost, holding a manila envelope. Divorce papers, he said. If you want out, make it official. I looked at him. His eyes were red, not from tears but from anger. His pride was wounded, his control shattered. You came all this way to hand me this? I asked. No. I came to see for myself. I wanted to see what kind of man took you from me. I didn't answer. Daniel stepped onto the porch behind me. Calm, silent, solid. Thomas laughed, dry and bitter. This is who you chose? A bookstore recluse with soft hands? And for the first time, I defended myself. No, Thomas. I didn't choose him. I chose me. He just happened to be the one who still saw me when I did. Thomas said nothing, just handed me the envelope and walked away. That night I signed the papers, and for the first time in 52 years, I slept without a weight on my chest. Daniel and I built something slow, gentle, and unshakably ours. We didn't remarry. We didn't need titles. We had truth. We had peace. We had mornings filled with music and evenings filled with silence that felt like home. But life, as always, is never done testing us. One morning I woke up with a heaviness I couldn't explain. I thought it was just age or grief leaving its last bruise. But the doctor confirmed otherwise. Breast cancer, early stage. Daniel held my hand the whole time, through the biopsy, through the consultations, through the endless hours of waiting rooms and whispered prayers. I thought he'd panic or falter, but he didn't. I didn't find you again just to lose you. He whispered once when he thought I was asleep, and I knew, no matter what came next, I had already won. Because I had been seen, truly seen, loved not for what I gave, or how I served, or what I endured, but simply for being me. The day I shaved my head, Daniel cried. Not in front of me. He went to the shed, pretending, to fix the old lawnmower. But I could hear him. It wasn't just about the hair. It was about the fear, the helplessness, the reality of watching someone you love walk into a storm you can't stop. But I felt strangely at peace. I had spent a lifetime hiding behind appearances, behind the title of Mrs. Dawson, behind Sunday dresses and matching pearls. But now, stripped of everything, my marriage, my hair, even my breasts, I found something I hadn't seen in decades. Me. Raw. Real. Radiant. Chemotherapy was cruel. Some days I couldn't lift my arms. Others I laughed so hard at nothing that I thought maybe I'd lost my mind. But Daniel was always there, with soup, with poetry, with silence when I needed it, and with silly songs when the night felt too long. The community, at first skeptical, changed too. Neighbors who had once whispered behind their curtains now left flowers by the porch, Strangers sent cards. My old church choir came to sing one Sunday afternoon, and I wept. Not because of the music, but because I finally felt held. My sons visited often. Michael brought Lily, Natalie's daughter. My granddaughter by blood, if not by life. The first time I held her, she looked at me with eyes that knew too much for such a small child. She reached for the scarf I wore and gently pulled it off, resting her forehead against mine. She didn't see a sick woman. She saw her grandmother. I knew then. My story didn't end with betrayal. It was just where I began again. Months passed, slowly. Then all at once, my strength returned. The scans showed improvement, and though the fight wasn't over, it no longer defined me. On my 71st birthday, Daniel gave me a quilt. It was made from pieces of both our lives. His college sweatshirt, my wedding tablecloth, a patch from the blanket we once shared at a picnic in 1972. In the center, embroidered in hand-stitched letters, were 5 simple words. You chose yourself. You won. That night, as we sat wrapped in that quilt by the lake, I told him something I hadn't told anyone, not even myself. I used to think I stayed with Thomas because I loved him. But the truth is, I stayed because I didn't believe I deserved more. Daniel didn't answer right away. He kissed my shoulder and said, "We all settle. Until the day we remember who we were before life taught us to shrink." We didn't need to say more. Now, as I write this, I'm sitting in the same chair where I started this story. The sun is setting. Daniel is inside, making tea and humming Sinatra. I hear children's laughter down the street, and it fills me with a joy that once would have felt like longing. I am not bitter. Not anymore. Thomas passed away quietly last winter. Heart attack. Quick, merciful. I went to the funeral. Not for a him, but for the woman I used to be. I stood by his grave and whispered, "You were part of my story, but you no longer own it." His second family was there, Natalie included. She stood beside me, our hands brushing. Neither of us cried. We were both finally free. I don't know how much time I have left. None of us do. But I do know this. I will not spend another day unloved, unseen, or unheard. To every woman who reads this, who has stayed silent too long, who has given everything and received crumbs, I want you to know something. It's never too late, not to love, not to leave, not to begin again. Because sometimes the greatest act of revenge isn't rage. It's reclaiming your life and living it out loud. If this story touched your heart, sugar, leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to hit subscribe and stay with us to watch the next story that's about to appear on your screen. I promise, it's worth it.